in today's show? Well, I was going to talk about biggest hits and biggest misses so far this season. And now we've got some news with Miles Brdges. So we'll talk about that as well. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Tomorrow, I will have a Christmas Day What to Watch For streaming show. That'll come tomorrow, as well as a Week 11 preview show. Today, because obviously there are no Christmas Eve games, so we're not doing a preview there, I thought I'd just do something a little bit different and look at 3 of the things that I got wrong, well, so far have gotten wrong, and 3 things that I got right in preseason's projection sort of stuff. But then just as I was hitting record, old Woj drops the bomb. ESPN sources the Charlotte Hornets and restricted free agent forward Miles Brdges are gathering traction in talks on a new deal, and optimism exists that an agreement could come in the relative near future. All right, so I know many of you, all of you, maybe not all of you, a lot of you will be rushing to grab Miles Brdges. I will not be. And your own decision on the morality or how you feel about it is up to you. I'm not telling anybody what to do on picking up a guy who bashed his partner and then pled no contest to felony domestic violence charges. That's up to you what you want to do with it. I won't be adding him, I know that much. The article, when you click through Woj's tweet, says that they may be looking at a deal, but if a deal can't be reached, he'll still be a restricted free agent next summer. So, there's no guarantee that he signs a contract. There's no guarantee of that. Okay? We don't know if maybe there's growing optimism that he will come to an agreement in the near future, relative near future. What that means next week, 2 weeks, I don't know. And then when he does sign a deal, all right, he's got to come into the team. He's got to get back in some sort of game shape. I assume he's relatively fit and healthy. But then there's the suspension to come. We are 30 plus games into the season. I don't know when Bridges gets signed. Maybe that's, say, the 10th of January. And then we're like 35. It's almost halfway through the year, basically, at that point. And I would expect a minimum 20 game suspension would be my guess. So I think if you add him, I don't believe that Miles Brdges is injured reserve eligible in any leagues. So you'd have to sit on a guy and wait for maybe, I reckon, at best, an all-star break return. That would be my guess. Worst case scenario, he doesn't play, which I think is probably more likely, or he plays like 5 or 6 games in March, April. Again, that would be my guess. But it's really hard to know because I don't know what the NBA is going to do with the suspension. They should drop 50 games on him, at least, in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm not doing the investigation in this incident. I don't know. So again, it comes down to your individual tolerance to how do you feel about adding him, but also the calculation. There's that part of it, and then you can completely ignore that. And as someone said to me when I tweeted, that this is happening, that the guy said the man served his time, like he served 0 time at all, none whatsoever. What's he missed? 30 games of an NBA season. Like he hasn't served any time. But then there is the contract's not signed. He's got to get back, and then he's got to get suspended. And I just don't expect... I don't think we see him in January. I really don't think we see him in February. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. But can you deal with a 0 for that long? For a month, 2 months, 2.5 months? Can you deal with a 0? That's a question that only you can know about your team. I won't be adding him. I know that, but I know plenty of you will be. So That's how I view the situation, irrespective of morality and all that stuff. I just don't think he's going to play until mid-February All-Star break at the earliest. I don't think he will play until then. But I don't know. I don't know. He needs to be signed. He needs to get back to conditioning, and then he needs to get suspended. So there's a lot of still to happen here. Pretty gross news dump on a Friday night to release this information. We'll see where that ends up. But that's where we sit with the Miles Brdges news at this point. If you want to do it, add him, because somebody will. Somebody will add him. So go and have a look and decide whether that's going to make sense to you. It doesn't to me. I don't believe that he's going to be making an impact anytime soon. But the impact that he's also, remember, he's only ever had one really good season. So will he be that same guy again? I don't know. I assume he'll be pretty good when he does play, but I reckon it could also be really rusty for the first little bit of time that he's back in. And you really need to balance that as to, does it make sense on your team, risking zeros for that long? And you know the answer to that, not me. And that's the stuff I didn't expect to be talking about Miles Brdges today, but here we are. Today's episode is brought to you by NHTSA. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your co-workers can tell, even your parents can tell. Everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI, paid for by the NHTSA. Let's get into what we were actually going to talk about today. And that is 3 things that I think I got right when looking at preseason draft stuff, and 3 things that I got wrong, and talking about how we go with that. So, I guess, Warnie?
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. I was pretty happy with Larry Markkinen. Now, I didn't expect Larry Markkinen would be the 24th best player. Not at all. But here we are. That's where he is so far this season. He has been immensely impressive during this season, basically all of this season. And even though I was excited about him, I didn't expect this good. Now, if you are watching on YouTube, you can see there's some graphs here, and I'll explain that in a second. But a shout out to a couple of people who helped or created this for me. One is Mark Comiskey, who created the graphs, and then also McCade Pearson, who was doing some work on those graphs for me as well. So some really interesting stuff. I'm going to be able to hopefully do a little bit of work with that as we move forward. But just to explain what that graph is, what that is that I've been keeping track of players' fantasy ranks every day, but in 2-week increments. So like you can see the first, you should be able to zoom in on that, put it on your TV, whatever. On that graph, you can see the ranking on like October 31st. That was the 2 weeks prior to that. Then there's the next day is November 1st, the 2 weeks prior to that. November 2nd, the 2 weeks prior to that. So it's a rolling 2-week fantasy rank on a per game basis. And you can see that Markkinen started off relatively high, had a little bit of a dip here in the middle, but his 2-week average has been pushing pretty strong. And overall, he's ranked 24th for the season. I do have an ability to provide graphs where it's just their overall season to date ranks. And often with those ones, you see big fluctuations early, and then they sort of middle out and get line. But this just shows you fluctuations in production. He's averaging 22.8 points with 3 threes, 8 boards, 2 assists, half a steal, half a block, 53 and 83. I had him in about the 60s or 70s. His ADP was in the 90s. His rank was like outside the top 100. It started coming in towards the end. I obviously didn't have him at 24, but I was picking him in round 5, round 6 in a lot of spots. And I think being 30, 40 spots ahead of ADP, which is what I was with a lot with Markkinen, I think that worked out really well. I think that was a huge positive. And if you got him on your team, I don't think you'd be complaining about it too much. So I reckon that one worked out pretty darn well. That's probably one of the better ones that I saw. The reason I saw this is like, okay, he's going to play good minutes. He's going to get a lot of shots. I didn't think he'd be the absolute number one because I thought Colin Sexton would siphon too many shots. But Markkinen's ability to score, shoot threes, get rebounds, and be efficient, even though I didn't see this efficiency coming, had me really excited about him in the 60s or 70s or late 50s. Not this level, and maybe he levels off. But I think the end result on that one was pretty good. Another one that I was pretty happy with was cousin Kevin Porter Jr. Now, people think that I don't like Kevin Porter as a player. I don't think he's a great superstar upside player at all. But he was ranked way too low in my mind. He was ranked outside the top 100. His ADP was 103. He's the 62nd ranked player this season. He had a few little dips, as you can see on that graph. There was a pretty cold patch there. But look at this continual improvement as we go through. Continual, just keeping on. Really big improvement stuff from Porter as the season's gone on, and he continues to look really, really strong. And in that graph there, you can see over the last 2 weeks, like he's pushed up inside the top 50, like some really strong numbers. He's averaging 18.9 points, so 19 points, 2 threes, 5.5 boards, and 5.5 assists with 1.5 steals, shooting 42 and 77. Not like a 68% free throw guy that he's been in the past. The field goals could still improve for sure, but he was a guy that I was targeting in the 70s in a lot of drafts. A lot of people didn't love me picking him there, but I think that that's been justified to get those numbers. I think he's been really, really solid. And as you're well aware, I do not care about turnovers in the slightest. And I think that's been a good payoff to get Porter in this spot. I banked on some improvement in his shooting, and it's come through. And the usage and minutes and all that stuff has worked out. I've been really happy with getting Kevin Porter in that zone, and I do think that worked out pretty well. The last one of these we're going to do 3 good, 3 bad. The last one,
Jonas Vasu-Inuwansas.
This was good for me because I told you don't draft him. Or I didn't say that. I said I do not like where Jonas is getting drafted. I had him in the 80s. His ADP was 54, and he's ranked 95th. It's been really bad. I was very concerned that what he did and I was concerned all of last season, and obviously I was wrong because Zion never returned. But what I kept saying last season is, man, these are like top 40 numbers. When Zion comes back, there's no way. When Zion comes back, there's no way. And Zion never came back, so he kept doing it. And then I said this year, well, Zion's healthy. So I don't know how they work together. He's not going to get that usage, and I think that they're going to have to limit his minutes because that combination doesn't work that well. And that, I think I was absolutely bloody spot on. So I had him in the 80s. He was getting picked in the 50s, and he's been a disaster. He's averaging 14 points with 0.7 threes, 9 boards, 2 assists, 0.4 steals, 0.3 blocks. That's putrid. Really good percentages. Part of the reason he's down is his blocks are well down, but his usage and his playing time is just completely in the toilet. And that was the expectation that I had, or the fear that I had with him. It's why I didn't want to take him in the 50s or 60s. It's why I had him pushed down further than that. So I'm pretty happy with my, I don't know if expectation is the right word, or where I was placing Valanciunas in drafts, or the fact that I avoided him and didn't draft him in any of the leagues that I was in. So I was pretty happy with that. That worked out sort of exactly how I expected it to. And that's always a good feeling. When you expect something to happen, you try and see, well, how's it going to work with the players on the court, what his minutes going to look like. This is what I think. Oh, that's actually going against general consensus, obviously, if he's getting ranked in the 50s and getting picked in the 50s, and then your process on that works out correct. Yeah, that's good. That doesn't happen all the time. Happens opposite a lot of the time. And you go, what am I talking about? But that one worked out pretty well, so I was happy with that end result. We'll go on to the ones that I got wrong so far. Well, some of them I definitely got wrong. And we'll talk about the reasons for those in just a second. But today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college basketball, college bowl season. The NBA, they've got it all at BetOnline.net. We have got, after, can we have bets on how many touchdowns Zach Wilson throws in the rest of his career? I don't know, that's over there at BetOnline, but we can check out the Bills, who've got to take on the Bears. 8.5-point favorites on Christmas Eve. The Bills should smash them, yeah? The Bears not looking great. I'm hoping that my man Gardner Minshew can come through for me for the Eagles against the Cowboys, because I need him. I need him to win my fantasy matchup. But all of the odds for Week 16 of the NFL are up and available at BetOnline. So they're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today, or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. So let's look at the bad.
I think I am a TH.
T to the H.
Yeah, TH for life.
Tobias Harris. He was getting drafted. It says ADP of 74. He was ranked in the 50s. So people were pushing him down from that, and I was not into it. I had him in that 80s and 90s range because I saw what happened when Harden arrived last season. He was the 4th offensive option, and he got lost. And he was ranked like 110th after Harden was traded to Philadelphia last season. So I thought, okay, that's going to happen. Now, it's been wrong. He's the 44th ranked player. He's averaging 17 points, 2 threes, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.3 steals, 50 and 80, 70s percentages. And I'll tell you why I got this wrong. And I did get it wrong. By the end of the season, I might not get it wrong, but he's off to a really good start. And as you can see, he's been continually improving. But see this little dip where Harris's value was falling off a cliff on this graph? It's about the time that both James Harden and Tyrese Maxey got injured. And Embiid was out. And then, look at the ranking. Just rise and rise and rise and rise and rise. To where he is now at 44th. So, there's two reasons. Harden and Maxey have been out basically all season. Definitely over half the season that he hasn't played with either of those guys. And he's gone in and doubled his steal numbers. Which, I know that steals are highly volatile year on year, but you can't project that. You can't go, this guy's always been a 0.7 steals guy. I think he's going to be 1.3 this season because I'd literally just be pulling that out of my ass. There's no metrics that you can account for that, or you can go in and just randomly pick a player to improve his steal percentage. You can't do it. So that's why Harris has been this good. Now, I will continue to say this, not because I want to be stubborn in my pre-draft assessment of saying that he was in the 80s or 90s, but because of these factors that maybe his steals do stick. But when Harden and Maxey are both in the lineup, I do expect that this ranking to start to come down and he moves back to a fourth option and Maxey, Harden, and Embiid are 1, 2, 3. Much like how I feared it at the start of the season. I could be very wrong on that though. Maybe he keeps up insane efficiency. Maybe he keeps getting almost 1.5 steals per game. And maybe he actually maintains a role as a third option and Maxey gets reduced. I don't know. But that is why I had him lower. I had him in the 80s and 90s and I was avoiding him everywhere. And that is why I think he has continued to prove me wrong. This other guy also proved me wrong. And I'm not going to get a chance for this one to be redeemed.
My name is Richie Cunningham.
Cade Cunningham. I had Cade. His ADP was 32. I had him in the 23 to 32 range, in that sort of early third, mid-third round range, because I looked at what he did last season, where I think he was 51st, and then he was 40th or 38th or something post All-Star, and I looked a second-year player. He'll take some improvements up. He'll play more minutes than what he did this season before, and we'll get some improvements in efficiency, and none of that happened. The minutes went up, and overall, when you look at his line, it's not that bad. And for everyone who's saying, look, you picked him in the third round and it was a disaster, it was. And it's not going to get better because he's out for the season. We had no idea that he had stress fracture issues in his shin. No one knew any of that. All we saw from him in preseason workouts were, look how buff he is, look at the weight he's put on, he looks huge, you'll get to the rim more. Not anyone telling us he's actually dealing with significant shin pain all preseason, because apparently that happened. We just never heard about it, which is frustrating. But part of my reasoning was, yes, he'll just take on more responsibility, more usage, more minutes, and efficiency will rise. But it didn't. It went backwards. And because it was only a handful of games for Cade, people go through these slumps. And we saw, even if you look at this graph, this is not a 2-week chunk graph for Cade because he didn't play enough. This is just his season-to-date rankings. If you look here, he pushed into the top 40. He was a top 40 guy for a while, and then he went on a shooting slump, and then he got hurt. So he was getting there. He averaged 20 points, 1.5 threes, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. His steal numbers were reduced by 50% from last season. I think he was at 1.2 last season. He averaged 0.6 blocks, and he shot under 42 from the field and 84 from the line. What I was banking on is that 42% to be 45 or 46%, and for him to average 22, 23 points, which could happen if you shoot that extra 4 or 5% from the field. And if his steals are even at 1.1, then he's easily a top 50 player. It's never going to get a chance to get redeemed, but there was every chance it could have, because if he was able to stay healthy, I don't expect that he would have shot that poorly all season. And everything else, the other counting stats, were all actually up over his rookie year. He just copped a big hit in efficiency. Yeah, and that's a huge L for me, definitely. I got that wrong. But I also I think he's going to be a massive steal next year, to be honest. I think people are going to fade way off him. And how many games did he even play this season, Cade? 12 games. It's a 12-game sample size of him shooting 41%, the exact same percentage he shot last season. And he shot 28% from 3. I was projecting him to be a 34%, 33% shooter, hitting 49, 50% from 2. And he just didn't. They didn't improve that. And then he lost from 1.2 steals down to 0.8. He improved his rebounds. He improved his points. He improved his assist numbers, which we all expected to happen, or hoped would happen. He played 33 minutes a game. It's just that's what sunk me. And it sunk me bad. It's a bad one. But the process behind it, I still look at it as sound. And that's a lot of what I do is the process behind it sound. Yes, he got more usage. He got more assists. Can't predict steals, and shooting actually just dropped off. And I don't think I'll go into a season projecting somebody to be a 28% three-point shooter, because again, unless they are just a horrible three-point shooter, which Kate isn't, you can't project someone, I don't think, to be that bad, and that's just a 12-game sample size. But huge L, we cop them. It happens. The last one is one that's gone on for a lot longer, and this is Terry Rozier. And this frustrates me, the Terry Rozier one, because I've been so cautious with Terry Rozier over the years, saying, I'm not sure I buy this shooting. I'm not sure I buy it. Then he did it for 2 straight years, and okay, this is 150-plus games of him being a solid shooter in a row here. Like, okay, maybe he's a good shooter. And then he went, actually, what did he do? He did this.
Psych! That's the wrong number!
Yeah, and then he just became shit again. His ADP was 48th. I was taking him around that 40 mark. Just around ADP, probably a little bit higher, maybe 36. A solid scoring guard who would take on more usage with Bridges out. Would have to be their backup point guard because they didn't really have anybody else. LaMelo would be out early season, would give him a little bit of a boost. And his counting stats, 21 points, 2.5 threes, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists, is fantastic. That's so good. The problem is everything else. He's like Cade, his steals, non-existent. He would get you over 1 steal easy. 0.7. Okay. 39.5% shooting. That's it. Like, how do you make up for that? He just has been bad with his shot basically all season. So far, he's been a massive bust. Huge bust in round 4. Gigantic, because he hasn't been able to shoot. And the steals, we talk about things dropping off. He was at 1.3 steals last season, 1.2 the year before that. So he's at 0.7. So just half the steals. He also went from 44% down to 39. Now, 44 is not great, but it is a big difference. But he's scoring more points. He's getting more rebounds. He's getting more assists. He just isn't hitting his shots at the same level. So there is still hope for Rozier. And as you can see, there has been, he had some real down periods here towards the start of the season. And the rankings all jumped up. And there's this period here towards the middle of December where he was ranked 35th for a period of time. It started to fall back off again. He's on a bit of a downward trend, but he was able to push it back up and show the value that we thought he could have. It just hasn't been consistent. But it's all tied to 2 things: field goal percentage and steals. And it shows how big a difference those 2 things can have in overall fantasy ranks. So far, it's been a huge L. I do have faith that one can improve. Will he get back to top 50? That might be a tough ask, but I do think it can improve. And that is the end of today's show. Don't forget to follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app. And if you are here on YouTube, thumb it up and leave your comments down below. What was your biggest hit in drafts? What was your worst miss? Let me know in the comments below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.